Hello and welcome to Gar Borras' Time Machine. Gar, today we're going back in your time machine all the way back to the year of 1977. Of course, the two big things out that year were Star Wars and today's topic, which is Saturday Night Fever. Now let's get right into it, Gar. What do you remember from the very first time you saw that film?
Well, the film, really had a huge part in, just the popularity of disco.
Yeah.
And it became so popular that at the time, I was of the age of where, of course, we're, intermingling, social intermingling,
sure.
and picking up on girls and stuff like that. And disco was so popular that if you were going out on Saturday nights, there were times that you didn't go to a rock place or you went to a disco place because that's where all the girls were.
Oh, sure. And we need to let people know, Gar, Saturday Night Fever itself, both the film and the soundtrack had such a huge impact on pop culture and the disco culture specifically that we're going to break it into two parts. Today, in part one, we're going to talk mostly about the movie and of course, John Travolta's rise to fame. And in part two, we're going to concentrate more on the soundtrack and the artists and the songs and including the disco craze, which a lot of people really credit Saturday Night Fever with, because before this film was released, I mean, you didn't really hear of disco. Disco was more of an underground thing, but it broke out in a huge way after this film came out.
It was like a nuclear explosion, literally. It was the popularity is hard to describe. Nowadays. Because nowadays, things become popular and things become huge. But there was a difference between when things became huge back then.
Yeah.
It totally feels different and everything. There are things that are going on now that are like just incredibly popular right now. Say for example, like Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Very much.
Incredibly popular. And but it's a very different type of popular. And the reason being is because things have changed so much financially. Because back in the say 1977, the craze was by the teenagers and the early 20s. People of that age, where nowadays Taylor Swift has popularity with young girls, but it's really locked into that.
Oh yeah,
it's and we're talking about millions and millions of young girls because she is incredibly popular. But see, Saturday Night Live was a much more broader, where it encompassed all of society. It wasn't just one branch of society or one area of society. And I'm not, picking on Taylor Swift because
no, that's a great example.
She's a marvel, at what she has accomplished and everything. But it is very unique in that it is really targeted, her audience is dominated by young girls.
Oh, sure. And a couple of things, too, about Saturday Night Fever and the disco craze and all that followed. I mean, first of all, the disco era, which came out right after Saturday Night Fever, of course, is post-hippie generation. So it's almost the complete opposite of what that was. And then besides the music, all of a sudden, what you noted, actually before Saturday Night Fever, disco kind of existed because dance music was always kind of popular because you had shows like American Bandstand and even Soul Train on TV back then. But with the release of Saturday Night Fever, I mean, it took disco to a new place. I mean, it took it to the forefront, the mainstream. And besides just the music and the artists, which we're really going to get into in part 2 of this, Gar, we should also talk about the fashion. I mean, even looking at something like Saturday Night Fever, one of the most memorable things from the movie itself was John Travolta's white disco suit.
Yeah, and it really sparked the popularity of that style of dressing. Kind of all like it's just there were, when you went to a disco club,
yeah.
It really, everybody that was there at the disco club really mirrored what you were seeing on the TV dance shows.
Sure.
How people were dressing, the songs they were dancing to, all of those things, and another unique thing that I remember about that time is the DJs at that time. This is the early years of DJs.
Sure.
And what DJs used to do is when they would choose the songs, they would choose the songs on the actual beat of the song, and then the very next song would be going to the same timing, and that beat, there was no separation from one song to the next song. It just metamorphosized into the next song, and nobody left the dance floor. You know what I mean?
Sure.
See, back in the 50s, when the song ended, you left the dance floor and you went back to your seats, until maybe another song came up that you wanted to dance to.
Sure.
But when disco came, it became, each song became fused into the next song, and they never really ended, and that kept everybody on the dance floor. And that was another unique thing about that disco period, from that time period that I noticed, well, let's put it this way. When people are out on the dance floor and dancing, they're gonna get thirsty.
Oh, sure, and
which means that the bar is gonna make a
lot of money. Yeah. And this is,
you see what I mean?
And that's something that accidentally happened. I don't think they even thought about that when they started opening up all these discos and dance clubs, back in the 1970s. And the thing people got to remember, the film was released December 16th, 1977, by Paramount Pictures. So that's what we're talking. Of course, John Travolta was obviously the star of the show. What people need to remember, Gar, was Saturday Night Fever was a 1977 American dance movie starring John Travolta, as I said. This movie, of course, is post Welcome Back Kotter for Travolta, and I bring that up because we have done a previous episode on Welcome Back Kotter, and think how different the landscape was when John Travolta's star was rising on Welcome Back Kotter. I mean, and compared to what he did in Saturday Night Fever, two totally different characters, and it shows what a great actor the guy was, from Vinnie Barbarino to Tony Marino in Saturday Night Fever. I mean, so you got to keep that in mind.
Well, yeah, and he was when I was doing research, he was so popular from Welcome Back Kotter that when they were filming Saturday Night Fever, they actually had to time when they were actually going to film to time periods so they could film the scenes without his fanfare, because when girls would be walking by and they'd see it's John Travolta, they're not going anywhere.
I read that.
Exactly where they are. And so next thing you know, you got a crowd of all these women, and all he's got to do is take his hand and put it in his hair, and they all, you know what I mean? It became a problem with even being able to the film Saturday Night Fever. You know what I mean? Because of his popular. That shows you how popular he already was.
Sure.
But then when Saturday Night Live got released, he went into stratospheric popularity. He was already extremely popular.
Yeah, and but I was reading too about that, Gar, and the thing was they eventually got to a point where they were able to do the film scheduling and able to figure out a way to trick those fans so they weren't showing up anymore.
Yeah, they literally had to trick the fans, so they could actually film these scenes. It's kind of comical, but it totally makes sense. I mean, if you're there, you got to figure out something.
I mean, yeah, very much like you're saying. It almost shows the rise of Travolta's star and his fame and his power. Almost like we were kind of talking about when we did our episode a few weeks back on the Partridge Family and David Cassidy's rise of being a teen idol and that. I think Travolta almost went through the same type of thing, not even intending to.
Because it's very similar time periods.
Yeah.
A lot of the same things that David Cassidy went through are a lot of the same things that John Travolta went through. They're very similar and very parallel.
Sure.
In the experiences you experience when you become a David Cassidy or you become a John Travolta, the incredible popularity.
Yeah, and Saturday Night Fever was directed by John Badham, who would continue to have a successful career in Hollywood, Gar, following the success of Saturday Night Fever. Some of John Badham's future films would go on to include Dracula from 1977, War Games from 1983, of course, with Matthew Broderick, and Short Circuit from 1986. Now, John Travolta is no doubt the star of Saturday Night Fever, Gar. Travolta plays the part of a young Italian-American man, Tony Marino, who spends his weekend dancing and drinking at the local disco. And he kind of is a painter, and he's kind of got a humdrum everyday life that he's kind of bored with. But then he goes to a disco on the weekends where he discovers
he's the man.
He is the king of the dance floor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which is the way of life. In real life, that whole aspect of the movie, it really, I think a lot of the audience could relate to it because, oh man, that's me. You know what I mean? I've got these big dreams and I'm stuck at this crap old job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then, when I go out on the weekends, this is my time to be me, you know what I mean? Whoever I want to be.
Yeah.
And, so there were a lot of people that watched the movie, and because of that aspect of it, it really drew the male part of the audience in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that was kind of the backstory, and how he lives with his family. And let's think about that too, Gar, because, this character Travolta plays in the movie, Tony Marino, he's this young kid. He's a great dancer, but that's kind of something he discovers along the way that he just loves and has a real passion for. And kind of the message throughout the movie is like, hey, don't kind of let other people lead you what you're going to do with your life. Do what you want to do, or at least take a shot at it. And if you notice, he lived with his mother, his father, his grandmother, and I think his younger sister. And interestingly enough, I bring this up because, in the 1970s, divorce was becoming more of a regular thing. But even in the movies on TVs and TV shows, they were still portraying that classic American family, like a lot of the Cunninghams, where you had mom and dad and maybe the grandparents and the whole family living together.
Well, yeah, 1977 was the time period when they were showing Happy Days.
Yeah.
So it's going on at the same time as this movie.
And it's interesting because you even look back to a show like The Brady Bunch that premiered I think early 1970 or somewhere around there. The whole concept is this blended family of new wife coming in. She's a divorcee, and the father who's a widower. But it's only like mentioned once or twice that she was ever married, or that he was ever married before. And then we just kind of, this blended family comes together, and nothing more of it is mentioned. And because even back in the 70s, I think when the Brady Bunch was on TV, it was a taboo thing to even mention the D word, divorce.
Well, yeah, and it just shows you how much society has changed. Calling divorce the D word.
Yeah.
You tell that to a young person nowadays, and they're scratching their head.
Hey, everybody's divorced.
What in the world are you talking about? It's you know what I mean. But you go back in a time machine back to 1977, and I remember going back to the 60s when I was a kid, and hearing my parents have difficulty saying the word pregnant.
Yeah. I mean, it takes you back to Archie Bunker, where he couldn't even say pregnant. He would tell his daughter, "Don't say you're pregnant. You're with child."
Yeah, and it's just, it just shows you, some social pressures are completely ridiculous.
Yeah. But that's how the world has changed. And Gar, as I was saying at the top of today's episode, many people point to both John Travolta and the success of Saturday Night Fever and its hit soundtrack that heavily featured the Beegees, all to be responsible for the disco craze of the 1970s. And you ever wonder, Gar, kind of, while the soundtrack had many great artists on it, it did heavily kind of feature the Beegees, and we're going to get into that a little bit later. But the Beegees were kind of just as big of a part of the disco craze and the disco sound and the disco era. I mean, I dare say that when I think of a disco era, I do think of John Travolta, Saturday Night Fever, and the Beegees come to mind.
Well, I think everyone does.
Yeah.
Because that all of that you just mentioned completely overshadows everything else that had to do with disco. Not belittling the other things.
Sure.
It's just when you take a look back, all of it just dominated over everything else. To where when you say you go online and you type in the dictionary looking for the definition of disco, and that's exactly what the first things you're going to see.
Those are the images that come up. Yeah.
And John Travolta and the movie Saturday Night Fever. It just dominated everything else. What was so trippy, I've said this many times in other time machines, but I was a rock and roller at the time. I was into hard rock and heavy metal at the time. But I was going to discos because that's what the girls were.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember, talking to girls, say like after the dance, and getting to know her, and basically telling her, well, to be honest with you, I'm really a rock and roller. I'm more into hard rock and heavy metal, and really the only reason why I'm here is this is where all the girls are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the girls would admit that back.
Yeah, and
you know what I mean, too?
Yeah.
There were some girls that were more into rock than into disco, but they were there, too, for the same reason, because that's where the guys, if you want to dance and you want to intermingle with guys, blah, 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 there you go.
And let's be honest, it was a hip thing back in the day. It's what everybody was doing. If you wanted to be in the in crowd, that's where you had to go and hang. And let's also... Another interesting thing that came up, Gar, in my research was I totally forgot about this, but, when people think of disco and the music and the Beegees and John Travolta and all this, I forgot about this, but part of going to a disco back then, besides just dancing, people used to, because that was a time that this was popular too, people used to show up at the local discotheque wearing their roller skates and then dancing around the discotheque.
Oh, that was another thing. It was an offshoot offshoot in popularity that from disco. Roller disco. The skating rinks took full advantage of disco, and the public really, maybe they didn't embrace it, as much as discotheques, but I have to admit that was really super popular. When back in the disco area, if you went to a roller rink, that's exactly what was going on. They would have the disco ball, the disco lights and everything like that, and people would be dancing in pairs on roller skates going around it was a lot of fun. Yeah, it really was a lot of fun, and it really added a really neat, twist to the disco with roller skating. Now, when I was back, going to these places, it was a time that I discovered a brand new drink that I personally associate with the disco era.
I got to hear this, yeah.
Long Island iced teas.
Oh, wow, okay, so that's where that comes from, wow.
That is the time period that that drink came from, was the disco period. And I remember I didn't even know what a Long Island iced tea was until I was at a discotheque and somebody was saying, "Oh, dude, you got to try one of those. They're dangerous."
It's funny you bring that up because
you don't know how much you're drinking until you know what I mean. It was a very strong drink that was easy to go down.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I have a cousin that when he drinks, that's his favorite thing to drink. And I bring the thing up too about the roller skates because when people think of roller skating, they don't typically think of disco, but it really did become a big part of the disco culture, and so much, and it was also a big part of it too because it also affected a lot of the disco fashion. I remember a lot of the girls started wearing, and you know what I'm talking about, Gar, hot pants. Yeah, that they would wear with their roller skates. These flashy.
I knew you were going there. Yes. Yeah. If you saw a girl on roller skates, 9 times out of 10 she was wearing hot pants too. Yeah. And I haven't seen a popularity in hot pants in quite a while, quite a few years. But hot pants used to go in and out of style. The first time I saw it was way back in the 60s.
Wow.
And it was when it was introduced, and it was very popular in the 60s, and it went by a different name.
Yeah.
And then when they reintroduced it, it became a resurgence in popularity. In the 70s, they reintroduced it to the public and started calling it hot pants.
Yeah.
But I remember, I think back in the 60s, they used to call it short shorts. Maybe,
yeah. Well, it's funny you say it, because you remember back in the 80s, they had that commercial with the women's pantyhose, who wears short shorts, and that was another kind of reference to that. But I remember that the hot pants were so popular in the 70s that it even made it onto an episode of All in the Family where Archie's daughter Gloria, "Hey Daddy, how you like my hot pants?" "Oh my God, you're taking your wife out looking like that. Put some clothes on, little girl."
Well, plus Three's Company.
Yeah.
Chrissy wore hot pants.
Yeah.
I think even Janet wore hot pants. That was another 70s TV show that was real popular at around the same time.
Sure.
Where hot pants. But it really has been a long time since that has been popular, and I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in the near future there became a resurgence in popularity of short shorts / hot pants again.
And that was another sign, because if you even think about fashion in general, how much it has changed since the 1970s. I mean, like most guys today, the shorts they wear are a little longer. Guys that wear shorts, they wore short shorts too back in the 70s, and that's why a lot of times you see those.
I had a job
Yeah.
where I had to wear those kind of shorts.
Yeah.
It was the first job that I ever had.
Yeah.
I worked for a restaurant called the Cask and Cleaver.
Oh, well, I remember that. Yeah.
I started out as a cook's assistant and moved up to cook, and then eventually moved. I wanted to make more money, and waiters got tips.
Yeah.
So once I turned 21, I moved into becoming a waiter, and the waiters had to wear. They called them tennis shorts.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's what they called them. But I would go to the tables, and I would be wearing those shorts, and I was completely unaware of how women were turned on by men wearing those shorts until I started becoming a waiter. And there were times that women would touch my legs. And women would be,
oh, wow.
all of their attention would be on my legs.
And again, that's just to show you how much the fashion and the style has changed. I mean, you even go back to the 1980s, Tom Selleck dressed in his Magnum PI, he would wear those short shorts, and that was a style back then, very much so.
Well, I didn't, none of that was really crossing my mind, but, I kind of learned it all the hard way. There was a couple of instances where things happened to me while I was waiting on tables that had to do with that, that were very embarrassing moments for me.
Okay, I can imagine.
There were two of them that really stands out, and I don't really want it because they were very, very embarrassing for me. They had to do with me wearing those shorts and women's reaction to it.
We'll just say use your imagination, and we will leave it there. But it's indicative of a time, and we bring it up as we often do in these episodes, Gar, because we want people to realize kind of what the world was really like. I mean, I think somebody sees somebody wearing that type of clothing, immediately okay, that's the late 1970s, early 1980s. I mean, you can just kind of tell from, and that's what I love about photography. You can look at a photo and not even really know off the top of your head, okay, but that's got to be from 1960s. Because, I mean, you see a lot of people, in photos, let's say, wearing tie-dye. Okay, it's for, I mean, that's still very popular, but it was once a lot more popular. And so
it was introduced in the 60s.
Yeah, and like I said, it's interesting because you look at the disco craze from the late 1970s and Saturday Night Fever, and the disco era is kind of like it's post hippie generation, and it's almost a totally opposite of what the hippie generation was.
Well, I look at it very similar to what happened when hair bands came to an end at the end of the 80s, and it transitioned into the grunge. Sure. It was very similar, but what was different about the grunge one was it was a complete rejection of everything that preceded it. Yeah. Where, when the same thing happened, during the other time, yes, it's just.
It's
really popular, but it wasn't a complete rejection of hard rock and heavy metal. Yeah. Because at the time when disco was super popular, hard rock and heavy metal had waned, but it never disappeared.
It never totally went away.
KLOS and KMET were the rock stations of Los Angeles, and they were going strong in the late 70s. There was Carry On My Wayward
Kansas, of course, yeah.
That was being played on the radio all the freaking time.
Oh, sure.
It was played too much. And so hard rock and heavy metal was still going on, and disco was not a complete rejection of it.
Yeah.
But that's the difference between what happened at the end of the 80s and what happened at the end of the 70s when the disco, had that huge surge in popularity.
Oh, sure. And Gar, we should also note that John Travolta was nominated for the Best Actor Academy Award. Of course, didn't get it, for his role of Tony Marino. Saturday Night Fever, now this is real interesting, was based on tribal rights of the New Saturday Night, a mostly fictional article by music writer Nick Cohn. So this guy wrote this article about what he thought. He went one night to this disco and kind of was his report on what that experience was like, and that's what the movie was based on.
Well, back in the 70s, when I grew up in West Covina, there was a number of disco places.
Sure.
And the real popular one, for the people that lived in my area was a nightclub called McConaughey's.
Okay.
And, it was like really super popular, it was packed, with all kinds of people, all kinds of guys, and all kinds of girls. And if you're looking to go where the girls are to be able to intermingle and dance and maybe, meet somebody new that you hit it off with, that was McConaughey's was, one of those places. And then another thing that was really popular that I remember was after you went out dancing, of course, now you burned all these calories.
Yeah.
You're starving. You're really hungry. And so everybody was piling into a Caro's or a Denny's or, these late night type restaurants.
Sure.
That would be open at the wee hours. So when you got out of the disco club, that was where you headed. And I just remember so many times doing that, and then we're at, say, Denny's or Caro's, and there's people that were at the disco when you were dancing.
Hey, how you doing, man?
Getting something to eat. And it's just like everybody moved from McConaughey's over to Caro's.
Yeah, and Gar, it should be noted, as we talked a lot today in today's episode, the Saturday Night Fever showcased the music, the dancing, and fashions of the 1970s disco era. It is also important, Gar, to remember that the sexual promiscuity that takes place throughout the entire film is what was going on in the world at the time. Saturday Night Fever, Gar, I should remind you, came out at a pre-AIDS time.
Well, that was a time, where, I hate to admit it, but that behavior was acceptable enough to be in an extremely popular movie, and the public didn't reject it.
Again, this is...
There's no way that they would be able to release a movie today with those same scenes and scenarios in the movie because the public would find that unacceptable.
Yeah, and again, I bring it up being pre-AIDS time because, it did a great job, I think, as far as Saturday Night Fever, because it really portrayed the way the world was back then. And you have to understand, go back in time to 1977, being a pre-AIDS time, meaning this was before anybody really knew anything. I mean, AIDS didn't really exist. If it did, people didn't really know about it like they do now. And so there wasn't so much a need to have to practice safe sex and.
No. When I was young, I was I was at the prime time for that. I was at the apex of my
your youth, say
testosterone level,
let's
so
say,
to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I was basically basically a walking hormone at that time.
Yeah.
You know, and it was, intermingling and hooking up and all of that stuff was like so easy, so much easier during that time period. And then when AIDS hit, all that stuff came to an abrupt halt.
Yeah.
I mean, a complete and total stop where all of this promiscuity used to go on in the 60s and the 70s and all of that stuff, and then the freaking 80s, the 80s hit and it was at its apex. I mean, it was literally at its apex in the 80s, and then all of a sudden towards the late 80s, that's when AIDS hit, and everything came to a complete stop. Going out and meeting women and all of that stuff, it's just everybody, was, completely changed their outlook on all of that. But also at the same time, male chauvinism in the 1970s was at a really almost what you would consider an all-time high.
Oh yeah.
And all of these subject matters are in this movie, and a lot of these things, male chauvinism resulting in rapes. The main character tried to rape the female main character in the movie, and yet they portrayed that scene as a forgivable offense in the movie.
Yeah, and
literally, she forgave him at the end of the movie. That is an unforgivable offense, period. Doesn't matter if it's 1977, 87, 97, or 2027. It is an unforgivable offense trying to rape a woman.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And yet they portray, really, this is, you have to show, the positive and the negative. And unfortunately, in the 1970s, that it really is a shocker for anyone that is unaware of this, to go back and watch this movie and find out that how these subject matters were treated in the storyline of that movie, and all of those, how those were treated in the movie by today's standards would be totally unacceptable.
I'm totally with you, Gar. Now, here's the thing, though. I think the fact that it gets buried is because of the fact that, and I'm not making excuses here, I'm just stating the fact, which is that when people think of Saturday Night Fever, they forget about that part of the movie. They concentrate on the fact of John Travolta and being the king of dance and disco, and he was out there on the dance floor. That's what they tend to remember. But I totally agree with you that it kind of shocks me with all the current cancel culture going on in the world that there hasn't been somebody come out and say, Saturday Night Fever should be banned and should never be played anywhere again because, John Travolta, his character rapes he almost raped the girl and he's made out to be a hero and he's forgiven. I'm surprised nothing has come out like that, but, I don't know.
Well, I think in reality that taking that kind of stance is going to a far extreme.
Sure.
And I don't think there are enough people in that far extreme area that might have those type of viewpoints to be able to make enough noise to get people to make a change like that. Yeah. I think the group of people that feel that way, I think, they don't represent all of the people that are in that area that have those type of views.
Oh, sure, and let's be honest.
They only represent a small faction of that group of people that have those views. And because it's only a small faction of that group, it's not enough people to make enough noise to really do something like that.
Yeah.
And that's really the reason, because people that live in these extremes and have these extreme viewpoints and stuff like that, in most cases, because it's so extreme, it's not really widely accepted by mainstream.
Yeah, and this film is a mainstream film. It was it's still 47 years after the fact remains one of the top grossing movies of all time, and it's one of those films that I know for me that you can go back in your life and say, okay, that Saturday Night Fever, that's one of those films that I'll never forget. You know, it will always hold a special place in my heart. I mean, very much like we talked to throughout today's episode, Gar. This film meant so much to so many people. It's one of those films that you go back in time. Yeah, I remember what the world was like back then. I remember what was going on. I remember what my life was like. It's one of those fun things to look back on. So there is that.
That's why I really wanted to do this, is because I'm a rock and roller,
sure.
And I'm really, it's so funny because back in the 70s, because I was a rock and roller, I was not into the Beegees. I was not listening to those songs. It really was not part of, what was on my radar, at the time. I was relinquishing going to these places because that's where the girls were, but I truly wasn't really into disco. Yeah. But fast forward to 2023, and my tastes have completely changed. Where now my tastes, whenever I'm listening to the radio, if one of those Bee Gees songs comes on, here I am turning it up.
Yeah, sure, and disco itself became such a popular form of music that even legendary rockers like Rod Stewart started making disco songs. I mean, he didn't put out a whole disco album, but just something like Hot Legs or Do You Think I'm Sexy. Even Kiss with I Was Made for Loving You. Queen did another one, Bites the Dust, because they were all trying to jump on that disco bandwagon. They wanted to see, hey, could we do that too?
Well, it's such a the only thing I can say is disco, it was popular, and but what I liked about that time period is it was very different than what happened at the end of the 80s. I really liked that something else could surge up in popularity and overshadow what used to be popular, say, maybe in, a year ago or something, or 2 years ago. But now it's become more popular than other things that used to be the most popular from 2 years ago. And so when you have something that surges in that popularity, the way that it happened was inclusive for all of our musics to still flourish.
Oh, sure.
Hard rock and heavy metal, even though it wasn't as popular as it was, when disco became super popular, but it didn't die. It just went down in popularity, and then when the 80s hit, it resurged in popularity. It was kind of like cycle.
Every 10 years.
Music used to go in cycles. Yeah. I remember, and I used to see it. I used to experience it while these cycles were happening. So I know that these cycles happened. You know what I mean? I was there when they happened. And when you have it was nice that everything else was still included. Where when in the 80s, when the hairband thing, it was a complete and total rejection
Sure.
of everything that was popular for the entire decade of the 80s.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's so weird because most things, when it goes in cycles, most things go in a popularity of about 4 to 5 years of being popular, and then dying off, or kind of lowering in popularity, and then something else would surge. Say, for example, country music, because that was part of these cycles. There would be disco that would be popular, and then next thing you know, now country music becomes popular, and now next thing you know, hard rock becomes popular. You see what I mean?
Sure.
It goes in cycles.
And Gar, if MTV killed the radio star, I dare say it was grunge music that killed MTV in the music video.
Well, it was really nice when, say about 10 years later, there became a resurgence of popularity of the hair bands of the 80s, and then all those hair bands that went through really hard times through that 10 years where they were all rejected, and I was part of that was rejected. A lot of these bands, they went through really hard times during that time period. Some of them, didn't make it. And but then 10 years later, it had a resurgence. So some of these people had an opportunity to be able to get back out there and get some more work and be able to pay some bills.
Oh, sure. And Gar, in bringing up the promiscuity that was going on in the world back in the late 1970s, pre-AIDS, I think the first time people really, because I think the first AIDS case broke out in Africa like around 1980 or 81. I bring that up because, until it really hit in the United States like around 1985, people didn't really start to really take it serious, because up until 1985, for the longest time, it was also thought of, you can only get it if you're in Africa, or if you're gay, it's a gay disease. But I think where it really hit home for many people, especially here in the United States for the very first time, was around 1985, I believe it was, when famous actor Rock Hudson died from it. It kind of it gave it a face for the first time. And then in 1991, when Freddie Mercury died of AIDS, as a result of AIDS, it put another kind of famous face on it.
Well, you're right about that, because then again, I was around in the early 80s, and nobody even knew the name of it. All we were talking about in the early 80s is, hey man, I hear through the grapevine there's some new type of gonorrhea that you can die from. And that's what it was going through the rumor mill, but nobody knew anything about it. We didn't even know the name of it. It was coming up in conversations, but because it wasn't hitting home with anything, anybody that we knew, or it wasn't hitting home with anybody that was like some major star that was dying from it in the early 80s, it just remained this thing that was a mystery until about the mid 80s. And that's when it became full blown, and then we knew what it was called. But all those years from 1980 to about 84, 85, all the people that were promiscuity was at an all-time high between 1980 and 1985. I mean, I was literally going and playing in Hollywood, and after I got off stage, I would be milling around. I would lock eyes with some girl, never speak a word, and next thing you know, I'm kissing her, and then next thing you know, we're jumping in the sack.
There you go.
That was going on right and left all the freaking time. All over the place. All you had to be was in a hairband and have that look, and girls would just be all over you. And to the point where there were guys, which this is where the name poser came from, was from the 80s, because there there were guys that didn't know how to play music, didn't know how to sing, didn't know how to do anything, but when they're walking down the street, they look like they're in Whitesnake.
Yeah, they look like a rock star. I mean, the look was what it was all about. And now, Gar,
the girls would go nuts over those guys too.
Yeah. And you remember, Gar, how I was saying at the beginning of today's episode that fact that the Beegees were heavily, one artist heavily featured throughout the entire soundtrack. That had a lot to do with this guy named Robert Stigwood, who was a giant in the music industry at the time, who had managed the likes of Cream, the Beegees, and Andy Gibb, of course, a film producer who was the one who purchased the rights to make the Saturday Night Fever movie. Now, I bring this up because, like I said, he managed the Beegees, so it would make sense that that he'd get one of his acts to heavily be featured throughout the soundtrack, because then, he gets a little bit of money for that, and so makes sense.
Yeah. And here's a piece of information that I came by that you might appreciate. Mm-hmm. Gene Siskel often said that this was his favorite film.
Yes, I came across that, Gar.
That was kind of not a surprise, guys, one of the most historically, one of the most successful critics.
Yeah, and I urge people, if you want it,
Siskel and Ebert, they go as a pair, but you have to admit that both of them are all-time the most popular critics.
At least in my lifetime, Gar. And I urge people to go check out our episode we did on Siskel and Ebert, but I'm glad you brought that up, because interestingly enough, another point I came across regarding Gene Siskel loving this film so much that he, at a celebrity auction, bought John Travolta's white coat from a movie.
Yeah, for a lot of money.
Yeah, so...
you better be sitting down when you see how much money he spent to get that jacket.
Yeah.
When they made that jacket, nobody ever envisioned that jacket would sell for that much.
Yeah, and again, Gar, some more fun facts about this movie. While the film Saturday Night Fever was being made, there were many working titles for the film, such as Tribal Rights, The New Saturday Night. The film was almost named Saturday Night after the Beegees wrote the song Night Fever, but the Beegees told Stigwood they did not want the movie to be titled Saturday Night.
Well, doesn't sound like they won.
Yeah.
Another thing that's kind of trippy, it's kind of mind-boggling nowadays because Saturday Night Fever was the first mainstream Hollywood movie in which the term blowjob was used.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that, that was the first time that was ever used. And in 1977, that was groundbreaking.
Oh, sure. And we should also note, Gar, that John Travolta first came to Robert Stigwood's attention when Travolta had auditioned for Stigwood's movie version of Jesus Christ Superstar. And Travolta did not get that part, but interesting note, he did not get the role he had auditioned for in that movie version of Jesus Christ Superstar, but Stigwood decided he wanted John Travolta to first appear, get this, in the film version of Grease, but the Grease movie could not be made until 1978 when the initial stage production of Grease had ended. The Grease movie would be made first, but it was John Travolta's role in Saturday Night Fever as Tony Marino that launched him into international stardom.
Yeah, international stardom.
So what's
you can't get bigger than that.
Yeah, but what's interesting, so you got that. So, Saturday Night Fever was being made, he had auditioned for this other Jesus Christ Superstar movie, didn't get the role, but Stigwood said, you know what, I want to make a movie about Grease, and he's going to be in it. So they also filmed Grease around the same time, but they could not release the movie until a year later in 1978 after the stage play had ended.
But that's so ingrained in show business.
Yeah.
When you film something, you have to actually say. A lot of people don't know this, but I have done TV shows.
Sure.
And you have to sign a non-disclosure contract, basically stating that you cannot talk about anything about the show that you just filmed or anything until after it has aired.
Sure.
So if you filmed it a year before it actually gets released, you have to keep your lips buttoned for that entire year about saying anything about that until after it has actually aired.
Yeah, and I hear you. Saturday Night Fever, Gar, was shot entirely on location in Brooklyn, New York. The 2001 Odyssey was a real disco club that was located at 802 64th Street in New York, which has since been demolished, a real end of an era. I mean, a lot of times when we look back on these famous movies from throughout our lifetime, you'll see like a certain landmark or something. Oh, hey, when I go to New York, I'm gonna go see that disco where they shot the film. Well, that has since been torn down, and kind of a sad thing, to think about.
But they did. Somebody did buy the floor though.
Oh, okay.
So the floor still. I don't remember. I came across something about there was somebody that was some Bruno guy or something like that that actually owns that floor.
Oh, interesting.
The dance floor.
And Gar, I think it's safe to say, as we said throughout this entire episode today, that the Beegees did for disco what Elvis Presley did for rock and roll. And it's interesting to bring up Elvis Presley because I was reading another big thing, but a big life event that happened in 1977, of course, was the death of Elvis Presley. Yeah, so just thought we had to mention it. And as we like to do, Gar, so often as we do in these episodes, is really take a look at what was going on in the world in 1977. As I said, also in 1977, Star Wars, The Force, and Jedi Knights were just as big as Saturday Night Fever and the Beegees and disco.
Wow.
I mean, that's kind of taking
they were trying to film it in Brooklyn, and they actually had to make deals with some of the local gangs of that area to be able to film.
Yeah.
They had to actually pay off some gangs.
Yeah, interesting.
That was another kind of thing from that time period.
And of course, in 1977, Gar, Jimmy Carter was the U.S. president. It said June 26, 1977, Elvis Presley, as we mentioned before, he performed his very last concert ever in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Wow, trippy.
And
the popular dance that came out of Saturday Night Fever, do you know what it's called?
No, educate me. I forget.
It's called the Brooklyn Shuffle.
Ah, makes sense. Okay. Wow.
It all takes place in Brooklyn, but that is the popular dance that came out of that movie.
And I'd imagine at the time, because most times a lot of movies are based like either in Hollywood, LA, or New York. But a lot of times when they're based in New York, oftentimes they'll base it in like glitzy Manhattan, where I think a movie like this would put a place like Brooklyn on the map back then, probably.
Well, it's so trippy, because now, the movie is just another one of those what you call a snapshot in time.
Oh, sure.
And when people are making movies in the future, trying to capture capture what it was really like in the 70s. So when you're watching the movie, you believe that it's actually taking place in the 1970s. Saturday Night Fever will provide a lot of those visuals that other movie makers will use as their references for their wardrobes, and everything. For the stage sets and everything. Sure. So, you take it to the bank. Saturday Night Fever is going. There's a lot of people that only think about the movie in as a movie, but the movie will be used by other people as references for setting up their staging for what the 70s actually visually looked like.
And it's also, in reference to Saturday Night Fever, it's also a reference point to the soundtrack that was the soundtrack to so many people's lives. I mean, it really was. And Gar, can you guess, in 1977, what was the most popular miniseries on TV at the time?
Miniseries, God,
Okay.
Rich Man, Poor Man was
Roots.
one of those series. Are you talking about those? What they call like a 5-episode movie?
Yeah. Okay.
From that time, Rich Man, Poor Man was one of those from that time period.
Well, okay.
Let me try to think here.
Well,
what were other? Because that was also a time period that those were really popular, and those are the predecessors to what we see now on Netflix.
Yeah.
Because when they release an entire season, it's like 6 episodes.
Well, Gar Borras,
6 or 7 episodes, which is exactly what they used to do in the late 70s and the early 80s when they used to do those mini-series.
Yeah, well, Gar Borras, I believe it or not, specifically talking about the mini-series Roots, and I bring this up because...
Roots, yes, that was oh my gosh,
and you know what?
Huge ratings.
I'll tell you what, I bring this up for a lot of reasons. It said that it set ratings records for TVs back then, but I remember seeing the movie, in my very young years, and for the first time, and I remember at the time thinking, hey, wait a minute, that's James Evans. Where's JJ in Florida? And Michael.
Oh man, we all have those moments.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're not alone there, brother.
Yeah, and finally, Gar, just to touch a little more on the musical landscape at the time, in 1977, in music, Fleetwood Mac had a huge hit with the album Rumors, and the Eagles had a massive hit with their album Hotel California, also a big hit. If you want to get a little more rock and roll oriented.
That's hard rock music that was still, and that's why I keep saying, when Saturday Night, it was inclusive to everything else. It wasn't a complete rejection of everything that was popular previous.
Yeah.
And that, that just kind of shows you what I was talking about, because those are rock albums.
Yeah, and then also in the rock category, I think if you want to get a little heavier, the big rock album from 1977 also included "Bat Out of Hell" by Meatloaf.
Well, the "Bat Out of Hell," the other ones really are iconic.
Yeah.
What's the guy that sang he became an actor.
Yeah.
And so he kind of wound up, leaving music at the height
of his career,
of the popularity of his musical career.
Oh, sure.
He actually wound up leaving music and going into acting at that time, which was a very daring move on his part.
Yeah. But
it turned out a successful move.
Yeah, and finally, Gar, before we really wrap it today's episode, another big TV show at the time was, which we're going to be doing a episode on in the near future, is Charlie's Angels. And interesting thing about Charlie's Angels is it was like an all-female lead cast. You had three hot looking chicks starring in this TV show, and they wore bikinis, and they showed a lot of skin and flesh, which was a new thing at the time. And it was saying, because of the success of Charlie's Angels at the time, many girls would look at the clothes they were wearing, the bikinis, and, hey, I want a bikini like that, or I want to go get what she's wearing.
Well, that's been a thing that's been going on as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
Say, for example, as an example, Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Sure.
That scene where they're at high school and there's this one girl that's dressed up like Pat Benatar.
Yeah.
And then another girl that's dressed up as Pat Benatar, and then a third girl dressed up as Pat Benatar. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So people have been using, celebrities and popular musicians as their influence as to how they want it for as long as I can ever remember. It goes all the way back,
to when they first started making movies.
It's even been going on before I was even born.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. People are always influenced. But, the difference is nowadays, all of these companies, their marketing knows about it, and now they totally try to use that as a marketing ploy.
To catch in.
Where back in the day, it was more organic. It just, it wasn't being used to generate sales.
In fact, Gar, in a few weeks when we do our episode on Charlie's Angels, I look forward to talking about this a little more. But if it had not been for, the success of Charlie's Angels, we never would have had that beautiful poster of Farrah Fawcett from the 1970s that hung on every young man's wall.
Iconic.
Yeah, iconic.
Iconic poster.
That
poster has people still know about that poster how many years after her passing?
Oh yeah, I mean that's one of the.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She's already passed.
Yeah.
But her poster still has life.
In a way, because of that poster and her success and her beauty, she will forever be. That's how she will forever be remembered. She will be forever young.
She's forever captured in that one
photo.
Second moment.
Yeah, Gar Borras.
The camera shutter dropped.
This has been another fun, filled-packed episode, and I think that's a great word to end it on. Is iconic, because we're going to get into the more of the iconic sounds of Saturday Night Fever in part 2 of this episode in 2 weeks from now. But this will be going up next Saturday, so I urge people to check out part 1. And Gar Borras, I can't thank you enough. If you could hold on for just a minute, I'll be right with you, Gar.